Golda, would you have a question for the audience?
Oh, well, I had a follow up to what Matthew was saying, and then I will. But if I can just follow up on what he just said about what happens if you post something embarrassing, and I've actually had a conversation with you, Jen, about that, who's not here, who's the author of Mastodon, where why delete is so important, and that to me brings up another whole can of worms, which is, if we want to say that delete should be honored, then does that mean we have to have federated agreements between servers, where servers have to be, you could be gray listed specifically for breaking agreements? Can there be agreements, and can there be assertions about agreements? And I'm just wondering if you might have thought about that.
On our side, it's really interesting thing. We haven't hooked it up yet. But if you, I mean, Matrix for decentralization, every time you send a message, the servers are basically agreeing on what happened in that room. And it could be a deletion, or it could be sending a message. And you can spot when people break the protocol, because they're going to start lying, or they're going to start producing things that don't reconcile with your view of the world. They're going to claim, hey, I'm an op, or I'm a moderator, or I just kicked you. And you'll look at your copy and say, well, no, you're not. You're lying, clearly. And what we could do is to absolutely start penalizing people and publishing one of these grey lists to go and say, hey, look, the server is not upholding the rules that it should be upholding, whether it's honoring deletions or whatever, and therefore its reputation should go down. So we haven't hooked it up, but that's a brilliant idea.
Let's move to Poems by Chow for one question, and on deck will be Mark Foster. Poems by Chow, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for this talk, guys. It's actually really insightful and I think so needed for our community. My name's Veronica. I'm a mental health and substance use researcher, kind of moving into the art space as a singer and entrepreneur. And for me, being part of the Twitterverse and the metaverse, it's been a real interesting exercise in talking to folks on the other side of my own parentheses and my philosophies and my perspectives. And so it's been actually so interesting negotiating the tensions between reputation versus credibility versus legitimacy in this decentralized but very much centralized platform. And I guess my question needs a little bit of context, but I've been going into crypto spaces, for instance, and they are true proponents of decentralized kind of ways of discourse and dialogue, but at the same time, these trust nodes that have not been built within the system of interacting with so-called people with different opinions, it's very interesting to negotiate how we build those modes of trust within communities that are kind of interacting and confronting each other for the first time, perhaps in a way that can be productive and full of dialogue and potentially healing. But what can happen is obviously these triggers and people reporting each other and blocking each other and consensus not being reached. And so I've always been interrogating this Medusa effect of trollings, people who are trolls, and understanding that if you cancel someone or block someone or report someone and they actually get off the platform, they're just going to make another burner, and we all know this. And so how do we actually have a turning of the screw in the other direction, where moderators and people who are building reputations in marginalized and mainstream communities can actually intersect in a productive discourse? I have lots of thoughts on this, but I'll keep it short. I think if I can reiterate the differentiation between reputation versus credibility and legitimacy in atmospheres of potential hostile environments. Thank you for your time, and I hope my question made sense.
Definitely made sense to me. It looks like Derek wants to answer.
Veronica, thanks for your question. And this is Derek speaking. I think an unfortunate side effect from what I've seen of people who need to exist within a community that, what am I trying to say, that needs more protections, that needs to be more choosy about what sort of speech it imports, is that these members of these communities often feel ultimately that they need to opt towards having fewer connections that they can trust, rather than being open and being part of a broader conversation. So like some activists or people who were moderating marginalized communities or what have you, pick your topic, told me that they chose not to use many of the features of a federated network and opted for a whitelisted approach, like only federate with certain actors as opposed to a broader space. The result being that they were able to more easily control the content and protect their communities, but at the cost of limiting the interactions that their community members could have outside the server or outside the small list of trusted members. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but observing the thing that happened.
Yeah, and if I could just quickly riff, like, I think the question also, if I can narrow it down for any future answers, is like, people are gatekeeping a lot of their intellectual ethos and perspectives. And if we have these extreme points of view that we're not able to bridge those gaps of knowledge, and people keep canceling each other and reporting, then it kind of defeats the purpose of meeting in the middle ground in a neutral space where we can engage in discourses. And I've had really productive conversations and really toxic conversations. And so that's where my, I think, question arises. You answered it. Thank you, Derek.
You're welcome. And I know Ro has opinions here.
Oh, yeah, I definitely do. So V brings up an interesting conundrum as far as like moderation goes, where it's like, who do you listen to, right? And as far as I can tell, in my experience, it's like there wasn't really a mechanism that really enabled particular voices to have a say in who got to speak and who didn't. I did it in a particular manual way with my particular instance, because like me, I'm a black dude, I'm a black American dude, I'm a cishet black American dude, right? So that's my perspective, that's my experience, that's how I view the world, you know. But while I do have insights into particular forms of discrimination, marginalization, things like that, there's just blind sides that I have. You know what I mean? Like I'm not a trans person, right? I'm not a bisexual. I'm not a gay person, right? I'm not non-binary. So there's particular forms of marginalization that are thrown at people that I can't recognize. So what was effective for me was bringing people in to that process, right? That had identities that were wholly different had identities that were wholly different from my own, to be like, okay, can we vet this? Let's check this out. Can we look at this? What do you think about that? You know, instead of me being an admin making a unilateral decision where I think, oh, this isn't that bad, so I'm gonna let it fly. You know what I mean? For me, it might not be that bad, but for somebody else, it might be a different experience. So in terms of like voices in the room, I cannot stress enough how important it is to get people from different backgrounds, cultures, and identities in that room to help with that process of deciding like what content gets through and what content doesn't. And that in particular, for me in particular, from my perspective, was a way for me to build credibility, a way for me to build I forget what the other words V was saying, but it was a way for me in particular to build a certain trust with the community that I was administrating. So it's like I was able to do that manually because the tools didn't really exist for us the tools didn't really exist for me to democratize that process. And I think if we're going to get anywhere in terms of like moderation, it has to be widening that scope of like who's allowed to share their opinions and empower people to make decisions on behalf of the community based on their particular experiences and backgrounds.
Right. And I just point out here that this is a combination of like pulling levers that tools provide, but it's a very human-based approach, right? You can't forget the human element, the decision-making of individuals in moderating a community when you're thinking about like solutions to content moderation.
Very, very, very hard agree. Very hard agree.
Just really quick, if people want to speak, raise your hand. People are requesting to be a speaker, but if you can actually raise your hand, then Robert can call on you.
Thanks, and thanks, Veronica, for your questions. We'll move to Mark right after. We'll have Ebher, on deck, as well as George. Unfortunately, all you need an Android or iPhone device in order to speak. So that's just the way Spaces works at this point. So with that said, let's move on to Mark Foster, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm new to the community here. I want to thank Golda for reeling me into this conversation. It's a very important conversation with the web, the way it's moving. It's very complex. One of the questions that I have is, has there been any discussion amongst the protocols as like Matrix and other ones that are building these technologies around decentralized IDs, verified credentials? You know, you think about things that people do on the internet that they won't do in the real world. You definitely will not, if somebody knows who you are and there's consequences, you tend to act a little bit differently. Now, on the internet, when you go onto the internet, you go into this world like there's no rules, they don't exist. But I see some governments and other entities and corporations moving to decentralized IDs for verifying based off verified credentials and like a decentralized self-sovereign identity. So linking all these things together is very important. Then also another question I have is about, context matters. We speak about context in the real world. It's like, how do we understand one another? But also the machines have to understand one another as well, so we can identify problems. Linked vocabulary is very important to understand systems that are decentralized. Like schema.org, it's got tons of types and properties about different things. For one of the things that comes to mind is fact checking. There's a claim review that allows people to have structured data that has a review system based off of fact checking. These gray lists and things like that are very important, because they handle some of these broad problems, but some of the moving parts are very important. So I think it's very important to think about some kind of linked vocabulary around this discussion. And then also I have three things really. I've got the decentralized IDs, verified credentials, linked vocabulary around moderation, and then maybe the concept of modes, like going in and out of modes. Like in the real world, you might go into a mode of self-defense, or let's say you want to go into a fact-checking mode. So it allows you to go in and out of these states of minds where you're not just thrown to things that you're not ready for or prepared for. But anyway, that's kind of my question. It's actually a three-piece question, so I don't know if anybody has any input on that, but I would definitely like to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Mark. We'll take André, and then we'll take Wes on responses. André, go ahead if you would like to respond.
While Andre's coming back on, can I just say that yes and yes. Mark, I know you might not have hit our first community voices, but it was completely about identity, and Jay might want to respond to that. I think that's one of the first challenges that we have is portable identity. And we do have a glossary that we are working on in our Azoro repo. And if you want to propose terms to that glossary, that was Aaron's suggestion. And yes, those are two key things we are working on, and you can join and help us work on it.
Let's move to Jay and then Wes.
Oh, I just wanted to say, first of all, I have another question I could ask after this to the speakers. But one thing I was going to say on that question is identity is what you tie reputation to. Like you need to have something to have a reputation about. And so identity is basically the thing that represents a person, which you can have reputation metrics for. And without that, it's very hard to know when a bad actor is, just passing into the network again through another account. So it's like kind of the Sybil attack problem in like networks, right? So people can like create many sock puppet accounts and then pretend to be many people when it's really just one person with an agenda, or one actor, like a state even with an agenda. And so unless you have some way to link them together, it's not going to, reputation isn't going to work. But unless you have everyone agreeing on one identity system to use, it's also hard to get it working across. It's hard to get the benefits of scale. So like if we have an identity system that works with Matrix as well as with Mastodon, then those two systems can make use of each other's reputation systems and TrustNet or, reputation gray lists. But if those identities are incompatible, it's hard for them to know what one metric is referencing. So that's basically just a pitch for the importance of having an identity standard and having an identity standard everyone agrees on, most importantly.
Thanks, Jay. Let's move to Wes.
Yeah, Mark, those are some great points. I just wanted to share a kind of conceptual framing that we use in our group. As this idea of the intimacy gradient, which actually comes from Christopher Alexander's book. I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's about architecture, and you know, and the notion of it is that your context matters a lot. It matters in like how you behave and how you think about things, and in a home, there should be a kind of natural gradient of public to private space. So if I'm standing on like at the street corner, for instance, right? There are certain things I can say and ways that I can behave there that are much different than if I'm standing in your living room. And one of the issues that we see with the design of social networks and the UX is that it's not always clear exactly what those gradients are, right? Like I'm just like I'm reminded of the episode of the woman who was she just kind of offhand tweeted something and then hopped onto a flight, and like 14 hours later, like across seas, when she landed, she discovered that she had been fired from her job. Right? It's like one of these things that like you think that your behavior like in the system is like somewhat private, but Twitter has this this kind of an ability to like amplify things and turn what you think is private discourse into something that's much larger, more public. So that is like one area that I would love to see just more work going into the design and like the sort of conceptual framing of these networks that make it more clear like what it is, like what mode you're in, how private you should be acting or how publicly you should be acting, and what kinds of speech is allowed in those different modes.
André, do you have a comment? And then we'll move on to Abe here, and we also have George on deck.
Thanks, Mark, for the question. I've just been crashing my app, so I'm finally back. I'd like to put the general question of what is Bluesky intending to be in the future? Is it going to be a public space or a safe space? I think we have to think which one do we want, and it might be hard to have both, to have all the benefits from both sides. And I currently think that Twitter is not a safe space. It does a great job at trying to stay as such, but I don't think I would call it such, and I would engage with it as such. And you brought a really good point about identities. Maybe this is just something that occurred to me during this chat, that our identities on Twitter should be tied to our identities, as citizens. But on the other hand, we do have to take into account all these other authoritarian regimes where you don't want that, like, by design. So it's a very tricky problem, but I think we have to approach it as, do we want a safe space or a public space? And making a clear vote for either side is my answer.
I can say that the very first thing that Jack said when he kicked off the Bluesky project was he wanted a durable protocol for a public conversation. So I think the initial mandate that we had was for a public space.
Yeah, I mean, our mission is focusing on public spaces because I think that there's a lot to be done just in the realm of public conversation and tie these together. And it's much more clear in many ways because when you're assuming a kind of a global public context, there's sort of less room for ambiguity there, whereas private contexts collapse all the way down to very small private conversations like a DM, and all the way up to communities of all different sizes and different contexts. But I still think there's definitely a role for that, and I would love to build tooling that supports all of the above. I think what we really need in the space right now is to tie together a lot of what we've already got and make it flexible and interoperable so that we can create different kinds of contexts that best suit the needs of our conversations and communities.
to answer a bit about, you mentioned that there's different kinds of identities, and sometimes you want to tie the identity to yourself. I think it's very important to keep in mind that you want to be able to operate separately. There is a reason why we use different kinds of identifiers when we get a 30-year mortgage than we do when you go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. If you just use a first name, and lots of people have that same first name, you can keep a degree of anonymity in an Alcoholics Anonymous. Whereas for a mortgage, no, you want like a social security number and an address and an entire credit history, and to really know who is the person that you are entering into that financial transaction. In the same way with a social network, you want to give people the power to say, this is a situation where I want to deal with people who have very strong identities, or this is a situation where I want to allow people to be very anonymous. And in balancing safety and publicness, part of that is deciding, how do you want to present yourself in different groups? How do you want to present yourself in different conversations? You're not always going to wear the same mask at all times. And shouldn't be forced to.
I accidentally may have pushed Robert off. He said I should invite the speakers until he's back. Let me see who is next. Ebhar, I think you've been requesting for a while. The better way is to go ahead and use the hand, but let me go ahead and make you a speaker for a moment. Oops. Ebhar, I'm not sure if you're able to speak. And Alexander's requesting, I'm going to go ahead and put on Alexander. And then George, I think Ebhar dropped.
I'm here, sorry. I didn't notice. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you for having me on. Eivor O'Hanlon is my name. I'm living in Dublin. I am particularly interested in this particular conversation because of the challenges that are coming down at the regulatory level, that we're seeing laws coming in that are mandating mechanisms of moderation, and in some cases what we would moderate. I think the UK online harms or online safety bill is an example, but so too is the manner in which the EU is mandating, say, filters or moderation on alleged copyright infringement, or the terrorism content regulations that are coming down, which will mandate the removal of material on the say-so of police within a very short period of time. I think an hour was initially mooted, but maybe it's a little bit longer. And the challenge that I would see for smaller nodes in a decentralized and federated network is that, take for example my matrix node, I'm very often asleep at a time that somebody might want me to take something down, and I can't do it within an hour. What are we thinking about with respect to how to support node operators in ensuring that they can comply with regulations? Firstly, from the perspective of ensuring that the regulations acknowledge that small operators of decentralized services exist, and subsequently post the implementation of those regulations, what advice and what support can be given to those operators for the purposes of ensuring that their moderation practices comply.
It looks like Matthew wants to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we're pretty heavily involved with on the UK side, at least with the online safety bill as it is now, trying to steer it into something that actually makes sense and is enforceable, whilst also making sure that whatever comes out the other side is something that matrix server operators, such as yourself, and thank you for running a server, are able to comply with. And what we're looking at doing is publishing reputation feeds as the matrix.org Foundation, at least for certain jurisdictions like the UK, where we operate ourselves. And if you are willing to trust our assessment of abuse which needs to be taken down, then you as a server admin or a community admin or just a user would be welcome to subscribe to that reputation list and then basically benefit from our reputation tooling on our reputation team. So that to go back to the much earlier thing of where do you actually source your reputation data? In practice, some of it is manual. Some of it is going to be law enforcement people turning up saying, hey, you need to take down this room now because of whatever reason. And some of it might be automated, just looking at particular keyword analysis or Bayesian inference. But the idea is that we can at least provide a way to help people be best efforts compliant to taking reasonable measures, I believe is the wording in the online safety bill legislation, to make sure that your users are protected from bad stuff. And if you don't like the one that we publish as matrix.org, then I'm sure other people will do their own ones. So that's in some ways, from a purely selfish perspective, why we're investing so much in this, because we're probably the highest profile encrypted messaging company in the UK now. And so we are going to be right in the crosshairs for the government on this, unless we go and provide a viable solution that people can use to keep their nose clean in terms of this legislation that's coming through. So hopefully we'll have the tools available. If not, I guess let's see what happens.
Thanks, Matthew.
Okay.
Ro, did you want to comment?
Oops. I was going to ask if Robert was back on to moderate. If not, let's go to Alexander and then Ro.
All right. Hey, y'all. Hey, Golda. Good to see you again. I've been lurking with the Bluesky community for some time because I'm really interested in not just decentralized data storage, which a lot of people seem to talk about, but decentralizing user connections, which ergo is about slowing down the rate at which information flows. This is the rate at which consensus is determined, and it creates things like repackaging of news is more profitable and valuable than producing it. So I guess my question is, what things is the Bluesky community doing in order to find a good, healthy rate limit for how information spreads? And just for context, I'm the founder of 150, the small town complement to big city social media. We fulfill a underserved market of the third type of network. We have centralized user networks. We have decentralized user networks like text messages and email, but distributed in the middle, we have a special rate limit that our brains are made for, with about 150 connections and then 3 degrees away. So it's a localized discovery protocol that complements the global discovery protocol of social media. So yeah, if you have any notes on that, I would love to hear
it. Who had an answer to that question? And then I think, I don't know if Ro, if you were planning to respond to a question, if you had an answer to that specific question that Alexander just asked.
I guess I can speak a little bit to this, which is, I think in general, discovery in decentralized networks happens more locally, like you're discovering things through your peers or through what's on your server and the servers that your server is connected to, or your peers' peers, basically. And so if you want to have like global instantaneous search, like you have on Twitter, you can just search a keyword and see what's happening across the world. That requires essentially an aggregator. And that is what Twitter does, but you don't really notice this function because it's all centralized. But on the web, which is decentralized, you have separate websites that are all part of a decentralized protocol. You have an aggregator called Google, which goes through, searches all the websites and then ranks them according to relevance and then lets you do a global search across it. So essentially, you need the same sort of service once you unbundle the social networks into their constituent parts.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think there might be a solution for slowing down the information, because right now, while it's spinning out of control, speed isn't necessarily the thing. I'm not sure what that solution is. I'm more specialized in like the localized discovery, but if there's a way to make that information rate limit, that consensus rate limit, just go a bit slower, even on such a globalized discovery platform, I think it would be very beneficial.
Yeah, I think basically in decentralized networks, another way to think about them is generally local first. And so that global discovery is slower by default. It's actually like a feature you have to try hard to implement to get it to be fast. It's an additional feature, not just a normal part of how you use the social network, as opposed to how we interact with Twitter right now. We kind of get to treat it like this frictionless global network where a message spreads from one end to the other instantaneously. You can search anything instantaneously. In a decentralized network, it's quite partitioned, and so you have to have a service trying really hard to provide that kind of search results.
Got it. Awesome. And then I think, Ro, I don't know if you had a question or if you were wanting to respond to a previous question.
I think we lost the connection to Ro.
Okay. So let's see. Should we go with George and then Danny and then Chris?
Are they all promoted speakers already?
No, they weren't. I was just expecting them to have magic. I'm promoting them.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great.
Go on.
Yeah, so I think, sorry, I think you can only raise your hand when you've been granted speaker. So yeah, just FYI. I think this question is more, I guess, protocol specific, but I think going back to this idea of reputation on agreements and, retractions and deletions and kind of, publishing reputation on if someone is following those. At a protocol level, how do you do that? Because, if I tell you, hey, delete this, of course, you're not going to be able to enforce, if they've taken screenshots, back things up. But you might be able to, see if they're still serving it in some sort of way. But, if you yourself ask, hey, are you still serving this? Or, show me what you have, they could lie and not, and just hide it from you. But, still serve it to other people. So, in my mind, you kind of have to, pretend to be someone else or, ask anonymously. But kind of how do you do that at a protocol level? Thank you.
I could take this one possibly, as I think I was talking about it earlier. And the evil way to do it would be to try to do some kind of DRM to force the other people to no longer have the right to delete the content or whatever. So don't do that. But it basically breaks down into two different classes of problem. If the other servers are behaving maliciously somehow, so you yourself can see that they do something inappropriate, like forward a message that they should have deleted, then you can obviously track that they are misbehaving. You can also have intermediary parties who act as a kind of sort of neutral moderator, independent moderator who might be trusted to observe these things to stop meta abuse happening. But in the end, there is obviously no way that you can stop people going and breaking the rules and silently to keeping copies of things that they shouldn't have kept copies on. So, that's basically a lost cause.
Got it. Thank you. So I guess the best you can do is you can have a reputation around, a server's, if they've breached agreements in the past. With
Precisely.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and you can gossip. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go for it.
You can gossip about what's happening. So if you have someone who is following you and they've got 6 servers they regularly hit, and ask them for all of the posts relevant to you. and suddenly they pull from one server and it goes, hey, the content with this hash was deleted, but doesn't give me the content because the content with that hash was deleted. And then you go to server B and it says, hey, here's the content. You can be like, wait a second, this person already said that that was deleted, and now they can go back to you and say, hey, by the way, server B is broken. You need to make sure that your deletes are actually reaching them. And if you're like, wait a second, I told that server to do this delete, and they gave me back an acknowledgement, and I no longer see it as present, now you'll realize, oh, they're not following the protocol correctly. So distributed systems, you can have gossiping about, does it appear like people are following the protocol? And if a server appears to not be following the protocol, you don't give them your content anymore. Doesn't help you with that piece of content, but may help you with future pieces of content.
Thank you.
All right. Sorry, I think Robert has to be recreated as co-host. So if you can go ahead and do that when you have a chance, Jay. And I'm going to go ahead and enable Chris, who I don't think has spoken yet, and then Derek, and then Mark.
Should I be asking a question here, or?
Yes, Chris, if you have a question, that's what this is for. I guess if you have something that you want to raise, absolutely, as long as it's relevant to the reputation and moderation.
Danny O'Brien, you also can speak. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So, hey everyone. Hey Golda. So, as you might expect, this is a comment masquerading as a question a little bit, but it is in the reputation and moderation space. So, I think one of the things that I find interesting in this is that we're trying to solve a lot of things within our domain of expertise. So, we're trying to find out ways that maybe the protocol can support this, whether our own reputation systems can solve it. And as Matthew just mentioned, and a lot of our speakers just mentioned, some of these things, really we can't enforce people screenshotting data and putting stuff out. Even with DRM, people are going to find out ways of getting around DRM. And the thing that really strikes me about the really pathological harassment and moderation situations. I was watching this play out yesterday with a prominent science fiction author who was really appallingly harassed by the folks at Kiwi Farms and so forth. And he went to local law enforcement, right? The first step he went to is to say, look, this is happening to me. And that first step always falls, right? You go to the external authorities and they either don't understand what's going on, don't have the resources to deal with it, or attach a very low priority to it, even though in his case, I think it was really profoundly affecting his and his family's life. And the thing that I keep on thinking about is how do we improve that? It's out of our control, right? It's to a certain extent, like we can't build something into the protocol. In some ways, it's a painful conversation to have because I think a lot of us come from a civil libertarian background, a civil rights background, a human rights background. So it's often very tricky to think about law enforcement or state enforcement as an adjunct to the work that we're trying to do because we're all acutely aware of the problems and dangers with increasing power in that space. But when people talk about, ensuring responsibility and maintaining reputation online, I think one of the things that we keep going back to is there aren't consequences to the really terrible actions and there aren't incentives to avoid it because those consequences would have to be acted out in the real world, right? That's how other unwanted action is placed through. Now, I'm going to cabin this very carefully and then I'll shut up. But by saying, as I say, this is a very hard question to answer. But my question is like, if we really try and answer that, if we try and work out where local law enforcement and local judicial systems, I think, as much as law enforcement, have a role to play, what do we build into the protocols to make that fairer and more just? And I'm thinking here about the authenticated collection of evidence. One of the hardest things for someone coming in as a third party, state-based or not, is knowing who's telling the truth, right? And also the other part of it is like, we create a system that is anonymous and private. At what point do we create escape hatches so that with the agreement of a large number of people, some of those invariants are relaxed? So that's my broader question. Thank you for letting me talk at ridiculous length.
No, great. And I won't mean to be rude by not raising my hands. It seems I can't raise my hand when I'm co-host. I do want to answer that briefly, and then let André and then Matthew answer. And Mark, I think, may have an answer to that. I just want to say I think that's tremendously important, because anytime someone's harmed in the real world, I think there's an obligation to bring law enforcement into it. A quick example: there was a group that called for the killing of a couple of journalists. I believe this were in Egypt, but I'm not sure. They may have been in Iraq. And they were killed. A motorcycle drove up and killed them after a public call was made on social media. And, can you get the ISP? Can you figure out who those people were who made that call? So that's a very maybe extreme example, but that actually is not that odd in certain locations. So I would say absolutely there needs to be a way. And I'm wondering, again, maybe if those gray lists can be extended to authenticate collection of evidence. And I don't know the solution. So André and then Matt.
Thanks. That's a great question. And I think the common case on Twitter is that it's hard to get proof that someone said something. So there's all kinds of trade-offs, one of them being, do you want to allow deletes or do you want evidence? So if you don't allow deletes, which is the case of SSB, the protocol I work on, then you have everything on record. And you have evidence, like the messages, the posts, they are all evidence, and they are signed cryptographically, so you can prove that person, or at least the person who controls that cryptographic identity, definitely said that thing. But I think it's really, really difficult to tie this with the law enforcement system. I don't know where you're based in, maybe you're based in the US, and the US is not the majority of the planet. It's, I think, 5% of the population of the planet, and there's all kinds of law enforcement systems around the world. It's really difficult to do that, but it's a good thing to talk about, obviously, because you do want there to be real world consequences for things that happen in Twitter or Bluesky, because it's still real world. It's a part of our world. So very relevant question, and I think the trade-offs are something that we have to always take in mind. And there's always a dark side to some kind of technical decision, whether it's like we want evidence or we want deletes. There's always a dark side to those.
I think that's, an answer. Matthew.
So this is a problem that we really have for real right now with Matrix, in terms of if our trust and safety people stumble across something which is literally a crime happening in real time, which is going to have material harm to people, what do we do about it? And it's, Dan, you're completely right that it's not necessarily the natural DNA of folks working in this space to go and call the cops in, because cops, like everybody else, have reputation that varies all over the place, particularly in different jurisdictions and geographies, which you might not know anything about. And as the years have gone on, we've tried to basically figure out the correct ways to escalate things. And at first it was an absolute joke in terms of literally ending up with local law enforcement turning up in to talk to us in person in London, and they obviously wouldn't have a hope of being able to do something about whatever situation it is, or alternatively then going and gradually working out a network of folks who can be trusted and are in the establishment somewhere, such that there is an escalation point if things are going completely wrong. Now, we obviously work, but we do work a lot with government full stop in order to keep the lights on for Matrix by providing communication platforms for the French state and for the German state and the UK and the US and a whole bunch of other governments who, weirdly enough, they also want to communicate securely with one another, come to us and ask us for solutions. And so we've kind of got lucky in that we already have some reputation in that space anyway, and it helps for going and establishing conversations with the authorities when something goes horribly wrong. But what we're basically looking at is hopefully providing reputation for the authorities too, so that you can actually figure out which people you would escalate to if you needed to, as well as the other way around, that the authorities can tell whether the people who are phoning stuff in are trusted by some metric on some grey list, or whether they're going to be a meta abuse problem of somebody trying to swat somebody, or whatever the other problem might happen to be. But it's certainly been one of the hardest bits of this, because so many of the attempts to escalate stuff, which has is clearly going horribly wrong to the authorities, can be really hard. And we've also seen the opposite of dubious authorities from weird parts of the world turning up and demanding data that they have no legal right to. And even if they claim that they are the cops for that particular country or jurisdiction, you have no way of verifying it. And so again, wouldn't it be useful to have some way of being able to tell, if you trust, of course, your own country's establishment, wouldn't it be nice that the UK could somehow vouch for this being the correct police force for whatever far-flung country it might happen to be? So we're basically trying to work on that for them as much as for the public too. Really interesting problem, though, albeit pretty miserable.
I think it's a tremendously important problem, and I think there's countries that are very, very systematically, like, they may prevent you from going into China if you don't cooperate with the Chinese government. And I think it's going to be something that we're going to have to grapple with, whether we like it or not. We may even have to have ways to measure if a government is a government. But that's another conversation. So, Mark, I think you're up.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this question. This is a very valid question. I've done a lot of research on the semantic web, so I've created a stack. Oh, it's not really a stack, but the domain name is SimStack if you want to check it out. But there's a slide where I've been collecting a lot of this data, and one of the slides is about data privacy and law ontologies for apps. It's a very interesting topic. I mean, you have to connect the laws of the land where you live to how you interact on the internet, and that's a very complex issue. One way is through ontologies, as far as an idea and a concept. There's a huge ontology that's been written, and I've got links to it. There's two links in there, but ultimately there's one of the ontologies is around the GDPR and the vocabulary of how to explain the things that happen within the app. And one of the concepts of that is it's all geared around data privacy, but it can also extend to other things for a legal basis of things that can and cannot be done. As we move to a more decentralized internet, we need to have some kind of ontology working groups around the initiatives that are in all these concepts that are being thrown out there that can be verified too. So, one of the things I wanted to follow up on the answers to the previous question I had a phone call come through, so I apologize for that. But I could almost see a world where we're used to seeing the HTTPS lock, right? So we know that that's a protocol that's all kind of agreed upon. But it would be very awesome if we had a way to identify a person that is a real person that you're communicating with on the internet, with some kind of universal mechanism that says, hey, this is a real person. It's like, I know when I go into a browser and I see that lock, I know I'm on HTTPS. But it seems like everybody's got all these different methods. And, I've been looking and researching through the Identity Foundation, and I've been thinking about, the DIDs and the universal DIDs and all the different methods that could funnel up to a universal protocol that can identify people. And I just don't know if anybody's talking about these specific things in these communities or not. But also, I have a follow-up with a question too, is that are we working with any W3 working groups? Like, for instance, there's a group all around social interactive on the web. I think or the W3, which is kind of what I used to go to for all the topics, but the more and more decentralized things have become, we got DAOs and we have different communities, but who is going to ultimately be the one that determines the protocol? So I got an answer and a question at the same time. So I would like to let it go on that.
Thanks, Mark. Let's tell you in.
So the short answer here is jump into our Discord on the identity channel and we can discuss this for the next eternity. But the slightly longer, when you want to know something like, is this a real person? Law tends to not work in the same way that code does. Code wants to have rational if-then statements that make sense, ontological soundness, whereas law has to have flexibleness. Do you own this piece of property? And the answer is like, yes, except for anyone with a better claim. law is fundamentally fuzzier. So you're going to have intersection points where your distributed system says, okay, let's stop now. Let's ask a court or a jury, and they'll adjudicate the thing and then tell us what the answer is. And now we can move forward from there. There are specs that people are looking at that don't say this is a real person or this is not a real person, but you could imagine things that say things like this person is been issued a credit card by Visa, or has a bank account with Bank of America, or contains a social security number or a national health service number, and get strong senses of identity that are asserted by someone. So the question is always going to defer back from not, is this a real person or is this not a real person, but what is the entity that has asserted that this is a real person? Okay, reCAPTCHA says this is a thing that can solve CAPTCHAs. Okay, maybe that's good enough for me. Maybe I need it to be tied to a social security number or a state ID from a particular state. And we can build ontologies forever, but there's always going to be this piece of friction. I like to say that there's one word that the computers and the lawyers will never agree on, and that's the word reasonable. Laws are always going to say this thing needs to be done to a reasonable degree. And the computers are always going to want to have a clear-cut case of, yes, this is allowed, or no, this is not allowed. There is no set the permissions of this folder to anyone who has a reasonable excuse for reading it.
Excellent point. André?
No, sorry. I just agreed with him by showing like thumbs up.
It's sort of a matter of duck typing. At this moment, this person's acting as a human being. At this time, this account is acting as a human being. But I do think it would be neat to have a UI that was somehow could recognize some level of proof. Oh, wait, there's a request from Chris Ware. I'm going to go ahead and make you speaker.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Chris Hewer. Can you hear me? Yeah, there we go. Okay, great. Hey, wow, isn't this exciting? All these people with all these great ideas and these great insights. It really is just an amazing moment. Once again, another Cambrian explosion. And it's just lovely to see this group of people come together with these ideas and addressing these really important issues. And it brings me back to look through history a little bit. And, you know, I go back to the era of the well and where the concept of you own your own words was kind of birthed. You know, the original ideas that then transcended or that became Web 1 before it got .commerce and became all about the e-commerce side. And as Web 2 productized our humanity and our data and the insights about who we were and behaved, and we became the product. And so many other weird, not great things have happened over the last several years. It's just great to be here now again, having these conversations. And I wanted to do a couple of things. First of all, address some of the earlier stuff. We really do need psychological safety in order to serve our greater interest to an earlier conversation, I think an hour ago now, unfortunately, but that's just a really important issue that somebody brought up, and I was glad to hear that. And we need to actually also look at how we invite each other in. Having done this before, when we did Web 2.1 and you know, went from the first bar camp to looking at the type of people who were technical developers that led to the first hackathons, we really had to go out and find a way to bring the activists, the nonprofits, the NGOs, the government agencies, and everyone in. And it was that intentional invitation. So that's something I think we all really do need to work on wherever we're at. But I'm more curious right now, actually, to the underlying question that's been asked by the last several people, which is there an effort yet across platforms, across ecosystems, to develop the micro formats and the standards? Because when it comes to issues of how do we kind of instill values and some of these other key principles, it's through design. And more importantly, it's the design of the information and the data structures on which the entire system is built. And given that what we're really doing here with Web3 and beyond is redefining our socioeconomic infrastructure globally, I just think it's important that we are able to come together and have these conversations. So I'm really excited to see what you guys are doing, Bluesky. And it comes down to this question: who's building the micro formats and the data specs for this era, creating those open standards, and how can we support them better?
Yeah. Jay, do you want to take that and maybe close us out? Because I think we're coming on to 2 hours, if you want to. Let me see. I'll just speak very briefly to that, but please raise your hand or let me know, or just jump in if you want to respond to that. I mean, I think that's very important. I think having a way to have some shared schemas that are very lightweight and can be connected to this. I agree that that's a really key thing. Whoever defines the vocabulary and defines the words is going to be defining some of the possible behaviors, and it's if we define like I was thinking of some vocabulary of like, I saw this, I know this person, I've met this person, I saw it with my own eyes, I heard it from someone else. If we actually have those things in a vocabulary to make those things easy to say, then we're going to have very different conversations. Or if we just have a vocabulary that says, I like this, I don't like this, I hate this. And so defining those vocabularies, and we are already building them in because we have vocabularies that say I like and I dislike, and why is that a choice? So I think that mindfully, choosing vocabularies that maybe aren't just the ones that were algorithmically most useful is something we should be thinking about. And not that we have to build them at a low level into the protocol, but that we should make those vocabularies easily available. So that's what I would say.
I've just been looking at X.API, which is I guess an evolution of the Scrum model for gauging activity and building those standards. But I would really love to see, particularly this group, with the insights I've heard over the last 90 minutes or so, work together on that in some way.
Well, if you want to join our Discord, Chris, we do have open pop-ups, so you can actually propose a meeting specifically about that, a working group on it, and I will announce it in the Discord to whatever the 1,000 people in the Discord. So absolutely, we can have pop-ups on anything like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So I'm going to go to Mark, and then Aaron, if you want to close us out, because I'm not sure if Jay is or Jay.
Okay, thanks again. I just want to add something to it. So when we're thinking about the vocabularies and working on these vocabularies, it's very important that we do research on, and of course, we need to do this, talk about probably more of this in the Discord channels and stuff like that in the pop-up meetings. But, I'm looking at, if you go to lov.linkdata.es, it's called, it's linked open vocabularies. It's a website that kind of has a node field to it to where you can see how they're all how they're linked together. But anybody who's interested in learning more and more about these vocabularies, because it's going to be new to some developers, it's going to be well known to some of the older folks that have been around since Web 1. But there's so many different ways of saying the same thing, so it's going to be very important that as we move forward, that we think about the past vocabularies and not reinvent the wheel, and link back to some of the older vocabularies so they can interrupt going backwards too. But I just want to
thanks, Mark. Terrific. I think we'll close it out here. Aaron, Jay, closing remarks?
I just wanted to thank all of our panelists. I think we got a lot of perspective here. Clearly, we could go for another 2 hours on positive reputation, negative reputation, whether there should be processes to appeal if you think you've been falsely accused, or to apologize if you think you were genuinely wrong but don't plan to do that again. There's a lot of questions here that the centralized services themselves hasn't even solved, like how do we spread the burden of this censorship? The people who are doing the jobs of commercial content moderation right now are suffering a pretty heavy burden of both psychological and emotional work to do that content moderation. So I'll say my appreciation to the fact that a thing like Twitter can exist because those people are willing to do their moderation. Invite everyone to jump over to the Discord channel if you would like to continue the conversation on any of these topics. And generally to say, I don't know that we're necessarily going to solve all of these problems, but I think we can definitely make better networks than the ones we have now. And that a lot of the people in this room are the people who are doing the work to make that happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Jay, yeah, I think you get the last word here.
Oh, I was about to end the space, but yeah, thank you everyone. And I second everything Aaron said. Basically, these are the people already doing the work, and I hope that once we're able to be more public with what the Blue Sky company is doing, we're going to be able to make a contribution here. Have a great day.